All right, good morning again, everybody. I really appreciate you coming. Is the is the volume level okay? Excellent. Okay. So today is the second part of a series of talks about the emptiness described in the Heart Sutra and the various ways it's explained and applied. We'll see if we finish up. I have, like I said, I'm trying to hit a certain time frame. So the Heart Sutra is the core explanation of the teachings in texts that are kind of collectively known as the Prajnaparamita scriptures. Prajnaparamita means perfection of wisdom, which is more or less the insight that all things are marked by sunyata or emptiness. So if we wanted to get even more kind of stripped down, we could just say everything is empty of inherent existence, interpenetrated. It's really hard to understand. Have a good day. That would be like the most, right? But it expands on it a little bit. But that is definitely the core thing. The most important teaching is this explanation of emptiness, and then we apply it to a bunch of different kind of categories, we could say, to try to really bring it home. And it's important to remember that the emptiness we are describing is not nothingness or negation. I'll say that a bunch of times, but it's really important. It is empty of an inherent existence, which is the idea that there is no eternal inherent thingness or characteristic or essence that separates whatever we're talking about from the rest of reality. So just, it's not negation, it's not nihilism, but it is saying that this bell, for example, does not have an inherent separate thingness or essence that separates it from all the rest of reality. It's an aspect of that interpenetrating, interconnected, altogether reality. So the bell is in fact the universe in a very literal and real way. Different translators have worked with this term sunyata in different ways because I think emptiness has those kind of negation or nihilism pitfalls. So Kaz Tanahashi has translated this word as boundless, and boundless is good. Like I said last time, it evokes a sense of boundarylessness, that there are no boundaries between any aspect of reality and anything else, which I think is maybe more positive, but it also has the pitfall that it might subconsciously reinforce that there is something that we're talking about that is boundless, which is not quite right. Last time I shared that I like using process or unfolding is a good way to approach it. And this is not a literal translation. For me, this is about trying to get the flavor, the feel of this word. The process or unfolding is not meant to mean the process of a particular thing. So we're not saying that the bell has a process. We're saying that the bell is process of the whole world. So we just want to keep this in mind. And with the Heart Sutra, there's really kind of two purposes, two kind of main points. The one is describing and teaching and trying to get us to have this experience of emptiness. And there is also a little bit of a doctrinal argument embedded in here, because some schools of Buddhism did say that there are these kind of fundamental bits that made up everything else. And the emptiness school, and certainly the Heart Sutra, is saying, no, there is no kind of bedrock layer of reality. Even those things that you might point to are made up of the causes and conditions, and they're dependent on everything else. So we want to keep those two pieces in mind. I don't think you need to get stuck on the doctrinal argument piece so much, unless you're a Buddhist nerd like myself. But I think the emptiness piece is really important. So like last time, I'm going to read the Heart Sutra to you. I'm not going to recite it, just so we can kind of keep it fresh in our minds, and then I'll jump into kind of what we're talking about. So Avalokitesvara Bodhisattva, when deeply practicing Prajnaparamita, saw that all five aggregates are empty and thus relieved all suffering. Shariputra, form does not differ from emptiness. Emptiness does not differ from form. Form itself is emptiness, emptiness itself form. Sensations, perceptions, formations, and consciousness are also like this. Shariputra, all dharmas are marked by emptiness. They neither arise nor cease, are neither defiled nor pure, neither increase nor decrease. Therefore, given emptiness, there is no form, no sensation, no perception, no formation, no consciousness, no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no sight, no sound, no smell, no taste, no object of mind, no realm of sight, no realm of mind consciousness. There is neither ignorance nor extinction of ignorance, neither old age and death nor extinction of old age and death. No suffering, no cause, no cessation, no path, no knowledge, no attainment. With nothing to attain, a bodhisattva relies on prajnaparamita, and thus the mind is without hindrance. Without hindrance, there is no fear. Far beyond all inverted views, one realizes nirvana. All Buddhas of past, present, and future rely on prajnaparamita and thereby attain unsurpassed, complete, perfect enlightenment. Therefore, know the prajnaparamita as the great miraculous mantra, the great bright mantra, the supreme mantra, the incomparable mantra, which removes all suffering and is true, not false. Therefore, we proclaim the prajnaparamita mantra, the mantra that says, Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhi, Svaha. That's one version of the condensed Heart Sutra. And so last time we kind of delved into the first third of it, which is talking about the skandhas and the sense of, it's basically how humans are put together and how we relate to the world. So we really focused on the aggregates of form, sensation, perception, discrimination, and consciousness, understanding that these aspects of what constitute the process of a human being, which is empty of an inherent separate self, are themselves empty as well. So again, this is in contrast to some other schools that said, well, humans are empty of inherent existence, but they have little bits. So the next few lines that we're going to jump into today are giving us a shorthand for another very fundamental Buddhist teaching. And that's really what this kind of next chunk is. It's hitting us with very specific teachings. And I think this is where diving into it a little bit is important, because if you're not completely sure what these kind of shorthand lists are referencing, it can maybe get confusing. So the first line we're going to jump into today is there is neither ignorance nor extinction of ignorance, neither old age and death nor extinction of old age and death. So that's the first line that we're jumping into. This is an abbreviated list that refers to the 12 links of dependent origination. So this is an original Buddhist teaching of causation. It's answering the question of how we ended up in the situation we're in as human beings, and how do we keep this going. So this is very important. This can be understood as a cycle of reincarnation between lifetimes, but also the moment by moment constant coalescing or co-creation of this thing that we call a self. So we have this kind of constant whipping around, as Jaku likes to say, around this circle. The 12 links of dependent origination state that for the whole causal process to continue, it needs all 12 links, starting with ignorance of our true nature, seeing the skandhas as self, which leads to the generation of karma, which is a kind of momentum, which leads to a consciousness that leads to form, which leads to the interplay of the skandhas we already talked about, which leads to craving and grasping, which leads to birth, old age, and death, and the cycle just keeps whipping around. Sue P, who I don't think is with us today, asked last time, it sounds like you're saying that human existence is very kind of, it's almost like reflex all the time. And so where does free will pop in? And I think this is a really good question, because frankly, a lot of human existence is just a conditioned response. If we're not investigating our life, we are just whipping around the circle and it's never stopping, and we're not even aware of it. And so we have maybe much less ability to stop and make a choice than we would. And so, as Jaku likes to say, a lot of practice is finding places to put the spike in the wheel to slow it down even for a minute, so we can engage with that. And there's a lot more to the teaching. You could do whole lectures, and there are millions of books written on just this. But the inclusion of the 12 links in the Heart Sutra applies the teaching of empty of inherent existence even to the way we conceive of causation. It's important to note that it denies the inherent reality of not only the 12 links, but also their extinction, because something has to have an inherent separate existence before it can become extinct. So even the ending of ignorance and the other links isn't real in the way we usually think of it. This is important because we are reminded that the teachings are themselves empty of inherent existence. They can describe a way of looking at reality, but they only arrive in the context of the causes and conditions that brought them forth. And clinging to them as fundamentally real can cause their own set of problems. So just those two lines, but there's a lot embedded in just those two lines. And I think it's helpful to know what teaching is being referenced and kind of the way it's being deconstructed. I did want to stop a little bit though and dive a bit more into the lines regarding death, right? Old age and death, no extinction of old age and death, because the genesis for this whole series of talks was actually a question that Caroline brought up during the Q&A of a different Dharma talk. She said something to the effect of, is there no death in Buddhism? Or is there only death in Buddhism if you believe in it? And she pointed to these lines. in the Heart Sutra? It's a great question, because it says right there, neither old age and death nor extinction of old age and death. So she was asking, well, does that mean that it's only our belief in it? And fear of death is also what brought me to practice. So I think it's a pretty powerful vehicle. I think most of us at this stage in our lives have experienced loss, and it can be very painful and devastating, and also a great fuel for practice. The thing to remember, though, I'm going to say it a lot, is that emptiness is not negation or nihilism. It's the unseparated, boundless, constant functioning of the whole universe. One of the texts that we use when Steve and Vicki and I did the precepts class that Steve brought in was Bernie Glassman's Infinite Circle. It's a really, really good book. And he has, in his chapter on non-killing, he describes it, I thought, very well. So I just stole that rather than try to reinvent the wheel. So he describes it this way. From the standpoint of the one body, of Buddha nature or enlightened nature, nothing is being born and nothing is dying. The very notions of birth and death are extra. Life is just this one body constantly changing. We can refer to these changes as birth and death if we wish, but strictly speaking, these notions don't correspond to anything. If something is to be born and die, one of our intersections or relationships would have to have a fixed nature. It would have to be non-empty. We tend to believe in the objective reality of birth and death because we see these intersections, which lead as substantial phenomena rather than as intangible relationships. So this is Mark again. This is why the quote of neither old age and death nor extinction of old age and death, because neither fits the case. The notion of these things are themselves empty, which is what the Heart Sutra is trying to tell us. So talk of old age and death or getting rid of them doesn't really work. But I do want to keep harping again that emptiness does not mean non-existence or negation. So things happen, just that things maybe aren't real in exactly the way we think. So just like I said last time, the fact that a truck doesn't have an essential nature doesn't mean that this coalescing condition phenomena isn't going to squish me if I don't get out of the road. So when we encounter this phenomena, this boundless event, this moment we relate to as death, something is occurring. Go to a parent that just lost a child and tell them no such thing as death. See how far that gets you. See how compassionate a response this is. And I would say it isn't. That's not helpful. There is a reason that the Bodhisattva of compassion is giving us this teaching on emptiness. It's very important. It's a key. Life is this constant change, this constant process. When I wake up in the morning and I roll over and I look at Patsy, she is and isn't the same person that I woke up to the morning before. This is a constant change. There is not a fixed eternal essence of Patsy that never changes. That's not correct. But there will be a time in this constant changing where there's a formulation, assuming that I'm the longer lived of the two, that I don't recognize and relate to as Patsy in the same way. There is that moment of change. So the relationship continues, but in a different way. Patsy was not destroyed. Life was not destroyed. But there are changes that occur that we maybe don't notice day to day to day. We all are this constant change. And then there are these moments of change where it is such a noticeable fundamental change that we can no longer relate to this process in the same way. And grief is part of that if we're talking about old age and death. So I want to be very clear that, when we talk about not separate from the rest of reality, no fixed eternal self, so nothing is really being born. And so because things are not being born, things are not dying in that way, that doesn't mean that these changes don't occur and our reactions to those changes also occur. So again, emptiness is not nihilism. It's just interpenetrating, interconnected, all process. So the next line, no suffering, no cause, no cessation, no path. Four Noble Truths, the fundamental Buddhist teaching. And we're going to deconstruct it right now because that's what the Heart Sutra is doing. This was the Buddha's very first teaching and is absolutely foundational. Briefly, it states that in life, we experience dukkha, which can be translated as stress or suffering or unsatisfactoriness. We experience dukkha because we want things to be other than how they are. We either want good things to last or we want unpleasant things to go away. We can free ourselves from dukkha by letting go of our grasping and aversion. And the way we do this is the Noble Eightfold Path. And this is right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So the Heart Sutra is reminding us that even these Buddhist teachings, concepts, and practices are empty of inherent existence, without a fixed or separate reality. We conceive of them, we communicate them, we relate to them, and we use them to relieve our suffering, but ultimately they are conventional designations within this boundless, as Tanahashi would say, interconnected reality. The next line is no knowledge and no attainment. I can't speak for all of you, but I know that for me, attainment is what brought me to Buddhist practice. I had this idea that I was going to achieve attainment and then I would have no more suffering. And so it's very interesting that these next lines are no knowledge and no attainment. And it's definitely the ideal in early Buddhism, liberating insight or wisdom and the attainment of freedom from all stress and suffering. But one of the things we say in Zen is that there are no enlightened people, only enlightened moments. And this points to the truth of empty of inherent existence that we've been talking about this whole time. Knowledge and attainment are not things that exist. They are no more a fixed thing that we can grasp than anything else. And they're not outside of ourselves that we gain. One of the things that we say in our school quite a bit is that enlightenment is not something outside yourself that you go and get. And so this is what we're talking about. But then it says the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara relieved all suffering when he awoke to sunyata. Again, though, the Heart Sutra isn't saying that these experiences don't actually happen. It's just that we need to remember such experiences are also boundless, also empty, also process. Just as your form is mostly kind of a mental construct. The same is true of some insight someone might get or some state of liberation that they might experience. Such mental constructs aren't a problem in of themselves, but they aren't reality. And the problem comes when we grasp onto them and try to make them reality, try to build a story around them. And I think in this way, it points to something that, again, we hear Jaku say all the time. We are not liberated from the world. We are liberated to the world. The world is just this, the dynamic functioning of reality right here and now. Nothing missing, nothing extra. If insight liberated from, it would have to be something outside of just this reality. But emptiness is showing us that everything is the process that is this moment unfolding. And that takes us to the next line. With nothing to attain, a bodhisattva relies on prajnaparamita, and thus the mind is without hindrance. Without hindrance, there is no fear. Far beyond all inverted views, one realizes nirvana. We just talked about how ultimately there's no thing to attain. Nothing is missing outside this present moment. We have to go and get, so what about the next part? The bodhisattva relying on prajnaparamita. How do you rely on boundlessness or emptiness or process or something you can't even conceive of? Relying is good. When I was writing this talk, I found myself drawn to the word resting. You rest in prajnaparamita. But however you conceive of it, it's important to note that the line, it was that the bodhisattva of compassion was practicing prajnaparamita. This is an engaged thing. So prajnaparamita, the insight into emptiness, is not a concept, it is an experience. And I think, to me, this points to the difference between wisdom and knowledge. This is not about learning facts. You could memorize all the lists or all the different translations of emptiness all the live long day. And it's not necessarily going to have a big impact on your life. And this is about having a visceral, real experience. We have to experience emptiness ourselves. We can't rely on explanations or the teachings, especially if we conceive of these teachings as things or as reality itself. The teachings only point the way. So the next section, far beyond all inverted views, one realizes nirvana. All Buddhas of past, present, and future rely on prajnaparamita and thereby attain unsurpassed, complete, perfect enlightenment. This section serves a couple purposes. The inverted views are that things exist, having an unchanging essence or self, or things don't exist, nihilism. Both of those are not correct. Instead, all Buddhas rely on direct experience of the insight of emptiness, which is prajnaparamita, which the Heart Sutra describes as complete enlightenment. This validates the core message of the Heart Sutra that all things are empty, including the self and the dharmas, but places this squarely within the Buddhist tradition. This is important. The Buddha presented nirvana, which can be translated as extinguishment or blowing out, as a complete liberation from greed, hate, and delusion, and therefore from the cycle of transmigration, or that kind of causal process we've been talking about. And in these early teachings, this was presented as a state one attained after lots of effort, maybe even lifetimes. The Mahayana, which the Heart Sutra is embedded in, tended to emphasize that insight into the true nature of reality, prajnaparamita, allows you to realize the freedom and perfection already present in this time and place. In other words, in this emphasis, we realize nirvana right here and now, as opposed to attaining nirvana as some other state. From the Mahayana point of view, though, the difference between the two schools is emphasis, not fundamental doctrine. I think there are some Theravadins who would probably disagree, but we're gonna do that here. In original Buddhism, it was acknowledged that all it took was the proper insight and you could attain nirvana here and now. And so even though Mahayana takes a different approach than original Buddhism, it is completely compatible with it. And in the Heart Sutra, specifically stating that all Buddhas, because remember, Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical founding Buddha, is considered one of many throughout history, that all Buddhas have awakened only because they realize prajnaparamita, or the empty nature of all things, make sure to recenter this somewhat radical teaching squarely back into the kind of mainstream of Buddhism. So I think, although I have a little bit more to talk about in terms of the mantra, I've been going for over 20 minutes, and I think that was pretty dense. So I'm going to go ahead and stop now and see if people have any questions or comments. And I really appreciate you coming and listening today. So thank you very much.